How do I want to spend the next hour knowing that like I'm going to die one day? The ownership that I have in this life is how I spend my time.
Hey, Cristina, welcome to Money Bites.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Our resident first few questions that we ask. First is, give us a one-liner about yourself.
I would say I'm a lover of all things Disney and immersive experiences and love the idea and notion of bringing people and place together to build community.
Oh, wow. That is one of the most eloquent one-liners we've had so far. Great start. The second question, what is a surprising trivia people don't know about you?
Surprising trivia. I grew up on a farm and I used to barrel race.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Third question is, what is your first memory of money?
My first memory of money is, I would say, the lack of money and it being spoken of in a quite negative way. So I'd say my kind of first recollection of money is probably not having a lot of it and it kind of in a more negative context.
Combining both of that, success or proving yourself was a big theme when we were initially talking. And it started off also in your first job. It was at a fish and hunting store.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I grew up in a small kind of farm town, not a lot of opportunities or areas around there that you could work. It was the gas station or probably the local McDonald's. And my first job was actually at a hunting and fishing supply store. And it was in this large warehouse where my entire job was meant to get a receiving order, go down the aisles and essentially pick all of the items that were on that order, package them up and ship them out. And it was the first job I had at 15. My mom had to drive me. It was about a 5-minute drive down the road from where I lived. And so it was kind of that area that I think first instilled in me the idea that I wanted more. It was a job that was a means. It provided me the opportunity to save up for my first car. And it afforded me a lot of opportunities in that sense. And the notion of being able to like build something yourself and have something that was of your own. But it definitely gave me that drive and idea of wanting more and wanting to extend myself beyond kind of, my couple square mile area around my house. And so, yeah, that was kind of my first job.
I also love the fact that from a very young age, not only did you have the thirst to succeed, but also you weren't scared of doing things beyond your comfort zone. That sort of led you to move to places without anything lined up, the first time being in San Francisco. You just flew there, or how did you end up in San Fran?
I had a close girlfriend of mine that moved to San Francisco. She moved to San Francisco to get a job at Apple. And she said, come to San Francisco, we'll figure it out. And so, I believed in myself, but was terrified, admittedly. Sat in the airport. I remember crying with my mom and dad saying, is this the right decision? And luckily I had supportive parents that said, go create your dreams and give it a shot. You can always come home. And so, yeah, I moved to San Francisco. I moved at the height of probably the dip in the economy. That was probably the worst moment to go there. And I remember struggling to find a job, literally hitting the pavement, walking to different places, like saying, here's my resume, who wants to hire me, essentially. And I found myself working at Hot Topic on the weekends, folding clothes, doing temp work. Basically anybody that would hire me to do something, I essentially didn't say no to. And I tried my darndest to use those as opportunities for connections and use those as opportunities to kind of further myself. But it was, it was a steep learning curve coming from a small farm town, where it didn't feel at the time that there was a ton of opportunity, and moving to a place like San Francisco where, tech is king and, everybody works at these huge companies and everybody comes from Stanford and Columbia and all these, huge schools. And so it was definitely a huge and steep learning curve and was I felt very vulnerable at the time, but it was something that I think hardened me, but also gave me that drive and determination and just kind of allowed me to put my foot on the gas a little bit more to say, like, I'm going to get there. It's going to take a little bit of time. I got to roll up my sleeves, but I'm going to get there.
Was it you wanted to get into tech, or was it a specific role, or what did you want to get into?
I had my, I think, long-term aspirations of being in a place where somebody recognized the name. I'd been around all these people that, again, had been at Apple and Google and all these different kind of companies. And there was something that felt very validating and personally fulfilling to be at a company where I think people could say, oh, I know where you work, and it wasn't like, well, where do you work? Or it wasn't, dismissed as something that felt a little bit like, oh, okay, you work there. That's it. And so when I was living in San Francisco, I remember applying for job after job after job. And I saw this opportunity for, I think it was a paid internship at the San Francisco 49ers. And I applied for it. I remember taking the Caltrain all the way down to South Bay. I remember, schlepping it. And I got there and I interviewed with the woman. And that in itself was an accomplishment, being able to sit there with the head of community relations at the time and interview with her, which, I felt very privileged to have that moment. And she said to me essentially, look, I can feel that you want this. I think you'd be great for the job, but you don't have a car. And I think it's unrealistic that you're going to, trek an hour and a half every day from San Francisco down to South Bay to work at this job. And I remember feeling incredibly defeated. Here I'd been applying and hadn't heard back at a lot of places. And I finally applied at a place and got my foot in the door. And then it was, you don't have a car and it's not the right chance, and I felt pretty defeated in that. But I'm a firm believer that a lot of the times you're placing these kind of breadcrumbs, almost like Hansel and Gretel, and you don't really know where they're going to pay off. And you don't really know whether, it's the coffee connection that you had or, the person that you happen to meet through a friend. And she ended up connecting me a couple months after with an opportunity to be the head of community relations for basically a brand new women's professional soccer team that had started in the Bay Area. And she was a mentor to me and somebody that I think believed in me in a way at a time that I'm not sure that I fully believed in myself. And so, she gave me that opportunity to really put my foot in the door. And so it was, an incredible opportunity at the time.
I just find it amazing that sometimes you have these, like you said, believers that just takes a chance on you. And it's just that one sliver of trust that you need.
Yeah, you never know where. And, again, that's the thing is I moved to San Francisco with, who knows, a couple $1,000s in my bank account and, no really idea about the city and what to make of myself there. And, and then I found myself as a head of a department managing a couple people and getting to work with the likes of Brandy Chastain, who had been in the World Cup, these players from all over the globe, Tiffany Milbray, Christine Sinclair, like all of these really notable, amazing female athletes. Yeah, and it was just an incredible opportunity to learn and grow and just to be around people that were amazing.
And is this where you sort of honed your skill in community building and events, etc.?
I had done events previously, but I think this is where I started to really understand the relationship of community building with events. I had previously done internships in hockey and done community relations. I had always, I think, naturally been somebody that was an event person without knowing it. I was always like, who's going to dinner? I'm arranging it, I'm organizing it. So I was always that self-appointed leader that was getting people together. And I think when I had this opportunity, it was, I think, the first real opportunity that I understood the place that events can have. And they can look at a number of different ways. It can be philanthropic. It can be giving back to the community. It could be more as a vehicle for ticket sales. It could be more as a vehicle for brand building. But, the notion was always the same is really using, people in place and kind of building that connection together. And so I think, I did something like, I think it was like 200 events in the course of a year with this soccer team. And so I think definitely cut my teeth in a way of quantity of events that you can do in a year. And so it refined my skills for sure and definitely gave me a little bit more to my tool belt.
And you were building your career here, but you took another leap of faith to the other side of the country.
Yes.
What was happening in New York?
When I was living in San Francisco, and as it's obviously the tech mecca in a lot of places, I was introduced to Spotify at the time, and it had been in its beta version when I was introduced to it. And so I immediately started using it and saying, oh my gosh, I don't have to lug these huge, CDs around. And
oh my goodness, CDs.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, you don't have to lug these huge CDs around. And, the access and ability to listen to music at the, on a whim was just something that I loved, that accessibility of. And I really loved it. And I really felt connected to it just through, I think, a little bit of happenstance happenstance and those breadcrumbs I mentioned, I ended up being introduced to their head of global marketing at the time, who sat in the New York office, and they hadn't officially launched in the US. And he had privied me to some information saying, look, they're going to be launching quite soon, and I'm happy to introduce you to this person if you'd like. And I said, of course. And I got introduced to her. And I remember, we had a lovely conversation via an email. And she had said, if you're ever in New York City, let's grab a coffee. It'll be lovely. We can talk shop. And I had absolutely no money in my bank account. I had no reason to go to New York City. I had no real connections there, maybe just a couple friends. And I remember going home to my roommate that night, and I was just like, I think I'm just gonna give it a whirl. She's like, give what a whirl? I think I'm just going to fly to New York. And like I said, I had zero money. I was living in a technically 1 bedroom in San Francisco, where I was living in the living room. My roommate was living in the actually official bedroom. And so zero money. And I think at the time, I remember putting a one-way ticket on my credit card that was like, I don't know, $500 or something. And I remember, being terrified of like, if this doesn't work out, I have this debt now that I've just accrued. And debt is always like something that gives me a lot of anxiety. I never wanted to have any debt on my credit card. And so it was always more for emergency purposes. But I was like, this is an emergency. We're going to do it. And so, yeah, I messaged her and said, you know what? I'm actually going to be there in like 2 weeks. And so I'd love to like schedule something in. And thankfully, she said, yeah, let's do it. And we locked something in. I stayed on a friend of mine's couch and met up with her for coffee. And the next thing I know, in the course of, I think, the 2 days that I was there, it was a couple coffee dates, meeting with HR. I flew back to San Francisco and they said, you can have the job. We're going to give you $45,000 to move to New York City, which was not much. And can you be here in a week? And I said, you know what? Give me 50 and 2 and I'm there.
Wow. Okay. $45,000?
Yes. Yes. I was hired in events, which, I think marketing definitely is usually a lesser paid role depending on what it is. But I was in events, and they were effectively a startup at that point. I think I was employee number 30 something. They hadn't launched in the US. And so it was definitely a startup. And so when they offered me that 45, I knew it was going to be rough. But again, I had my eye on a prize and I said, all right, I'll make it work. And so I think in my first year working there, I think any company event that had food at it, I was like, you name it, I'm there. Like, I had any after party, and I was always eating the peanut butter and jelly that was in the fridge. I was always that person that I was like, it's okay. This is going to be a short thing. And it's just a stepping stone somewhere else. And so, yeah, but 45,000, looking back, I'm like, how did I manage?
Were you joining from sort of events community coordinator to a similar role, or was this something completely different?
No, so I went from community relations in sports, and I actually, after I had that role in sports, I took an opportunity that was in an experiential marketing agency. So I worked the agency side for a while as an account executive and had a number of different accounts from Nintendo to CBS Interactive. It was in events, but doing account management for a number of accounts. And it was really there that the transition to Spotify happened. It was still in the vein of events. It's just a different type of an event, right? Community events, you have more of player interactions. Obviously you have games. And so it's a little bit different of a mechanic, where when I was going into more of that experiential marketing with the agency in San Francisco, that is where I started to really get these kind of, larger multi-million-dollar style events, that we're investing in, or, retail activations and working with these like huge brands. I think the combination of those really allowed me then to go into that job at Spotify. And I think I landed on like maybe a Monday or Tuesday. The next week I went into work, and I think I was already doing my first event. And it was like a partnership with Mercury Lounge that we did, where it was this small concert that we were putting on with Mercury Lounge. And then as I continued with the company, we started building our brand more on like South by and Cannes, and again, expanding that scope and expanding, I think, into those larger tier events. And so it definitely, both of those really, I think, shaped me and gave me those tools as I started to go into that role.
That's amazing. I love how not only did your role sort of grow on each other progressively, but it sounds like you really took the Spotify role in a completely new city where you didn't have any network, in a complete new company, total startup, just on your belief in what that startup's mission was. What got you the courage to make all those changes?
there was some of it that, of course, was courage from me, but I also want to always give acknowledgement to the people that believed in me. I think to myself, like, the woman who hired me, she could have hired somebody in New York. I mean, New York has a billion, like event professionals. It wasn't that probably I was any different necessarily in the sense. It was always believing in myself, but also people taking chances and believing in me. I remember in Florida just feeling like I was capable of so much more. And, when I was in San Francisco, the same thing, as I felt like I wasn't done, like I felt like I took this big leap of faith, and, the first year admittedly was incredibly hard. Everything is different, but the nice thing is, like, if you let it take you, you become different as well, and you grow and you build this armor. It wasn't easy, but I got through it. And I think that was a similar mentality that I took with me to New York. Was I did it once, right? I rebuilt myself, or built myself, and continued to kind of grow when I moved to San Francisco. And I can do that in New York. I believed that I was capable more, and I believed that I could get there. And I just had to do a little bit of the pounding the pavement, if you will. Meaning just one day at a time and pushing through. But, there was days that I worked in the office, like, till 2 a.m. And it wasn't that anybody was telling me I had to, but it was like growing myself and knowing that I needed to be the best me, and I was going to push myself to get there.
Spotify was the pivotal moment where your life and career satisfaction just skyrockets. Was it the company, the culture, the role? What was so satisfying about it?
A lot of that. It was at a great, time at the company where they were building their culture, right? And there was so many people from, all these different countries that I was interacting with. And that was such a, like a beautiful moment for me as well. Like coming from a place, like that didn't have a lot of diversity, being around all these people and cultures and getting to travel places. And so I think that was definitely some of it. But I think another part was just, I felt so connected to the brands. I found professionally that's a really important thing for me, is like feeling connected to the brand and what I'm kind of spending my time on. I've never been somebody that I think looks at a job as a job. I've always wanted a job to be, in some senses, like a part of my identity, which arguable if that's like a healthy way to look at it. But, I feel like we often spend more time at our jobs than we do with our partners, with our families. And so, I always want to believe in the brand that I'm being a part of and representing. And as the notoriety of the company grew, and as the company itself grew, there was that moment, like I said, where it felt really amazing to be at a company that people were like, oh, wow, you work at Spotify. And not that that should ever be a measure of success, but again, somebody coming from a very small town, feeling like I had this thing on my resume that people actually said, well, I know what that company is. That's cool. Felt really proud for me at that moment.
I love that. I feel everyone has a different motivator that drives them. And you mentioned you wanted to work at a place that was brand recognized. This was sort of your opportunity to prove yourself that you have been seeking since hunting and fishing.
Yeah. And I think that's why, from a satisfaction standpoint, I think that's why it really kind of pivoted me, is because I think at that moment it was that validation. I had proven myself worthy, and I had proven my skills, and kind of validated my own self to say that I deserved to be in that seat, and I could go up against the Googles and, the people from Stanford and things like that, when I never felt that I had that pedigree going in.
And it wasn't, or rather, it was multiple seats. While at Spotify, you changed roles several times.
I did.
What drove you to continuously seek different roles?
Maybe there's this sense in me of just continued growth and pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. But I think in my career, I've started to realize that I'm a little bit of a builder. At Spotify, after doing events for a number of years, the makeup of the company had changed. The types of events we did change. There were so many different components, but it felt like a really good opportunity to push myself again and to kind of add another tool to my tool belt. And so I had the opportunity to move into their brand and creative team. And so I went from events to kind of the larger kind of brand of the company, and being able to be a part of really developing and building and protecting, in a sense, that brand as it continued to grow, as the company continued to grow. And so I did a brand for a little while, and then I eventually moved into what was considered the global workplace team, and worked on more of the physical build out of our office spaces, and got to work with amazing installations and artists and fabricators on, building out our spaces, which I found myself very privy to this opportunity of taking on a first of its kind role within the company. And I think that was like a very thorough thread that I found of myself taking on at Spotify, was these kind of first of a kind roles in a sense. Like I was the first event person hired outside of my boss. I really found myself having these amazing opportunities to kind of shape things and build things at the company. And I think I was fortunate enough to have that trust from colleagues and mentors that they gave me that space to build and create and kind of pitch and, do these things that I probably wouldn't have, ever had the opportunity to do outside of the company.
You mentioned the keyword pitch. Does that mean that these roles were not necessarily you were reorged into it, you proactively sought them out and you pitched yourself for that role?
Yeah. So like the last job that I had, which was with the Global Workplace team, that role never was actually on paper. I had been having coffee dates with the global head of workplace who had came over from Google, and him and I had kept having conversations over coffee. And it was really just conversations about our new office. I was like, oh, when is it going to open? And I clearly, I think, showed a curiosity and a desire to learn from him. And the next thing I know, we started talking more and more. And I said, why don't we have brand guidelines for our offices? Like we should, just in the same way as we, treat brand guidelines like externally within the company for different agencies. And we sparked something in these conversations that came really organically and naturally. And the next thing I know, I had been talking to the recruiter about, hey, I want to join their team. And he said, this gentleman has a role. He's calling it this, but there's no job specs. You're not going to get him. What do you think? And I said, you know what, let's go for it. So yeah, I signed on to a job that was never advertised, had really no, job specs or job description within the company, and got hired into it. And so I took this new position that I had to build from the ground up. I, of course, was very passionate about what he was doing. And again, he was creating spaces that were very much around this sense of bringing people and place together and building that community. It was just a different community than I had built before, because I so much focused on more consumer events and consumer activations. And this was kind of within our own house at Spotify, and really building, the office spaces for guests and employees and artists. And so the way that we were defining experience was so different, but yeah, a totally new role, which they've maintained and they've kept now, but it had never existed before.
I find this fascinating, especially as you sort of go up in your tenure at a company. I think it becomes more and more easy to become complacent with just your role and, keep your heads down and just do the work. So the fact that you continued to have coffee dates with different folks outside of your org and keep that curiosity, would love to hear sort of how did you find and meet and reach out to these people?
It wasn't necessarily that I was seeking moving, but, at Spotify, and Daniel's, I think, publicly spoken about this, but he's very adamant about what he would call as like tour of duty or tours of duty. This notion that, you kind of go into a role for a period of time. And, there's a period of time where, to your point, it's you kind of outgrow it in a sense, either in your own skill sets and what you can kind of give to the role, but then also, on the reverse, like what the role can give to you and like what it's helping to support for you in your life. And I think when I had, been in the brand team for a while, it was a kind of similar thing where I felt like I had gotten some of the skills that I was looking for, and I missed the sense of place. And so I, again, had been looking at like, well, what is place really defined by at Spotify now, at that time? And the company was always evolving and growing. The one thing I learned there is, to your point, when you've been with a company for a while, is you can stay static, or you can look and continue to grow with the company and try to see if there's opportunities that enable you to deepen your skill set or give a wider breadth of it. And I don't ever believe in kind of like a one road career. And so I think I was driving on my little road and took a little bit of a side path. And so I was always connecting, I think, with our recruiters, always keeping my eye open on job boards, just to kind of see if there was ever anything that kind of sparked interest in the sense of like something new or something that the company was taking a gamble in or wanting to explore that, may align with my skill set. And so it just happened that it kind of found itself in a more organic way over a coffee conversation. But I wasn't necessarily seeking out a specific role as much as I was always trying to keep, I think, abreast of what the company was evolving to become.
That I feel is a super amazing advice, being at least aware of where the company is making investments, where their top priorities are. So with that said, you grow with the company, you're super satisfied, but you start looking at potentially moving to a new adventure. You mentioned here that your daughter was born, etc. What was the impetus for you to move to a different company, especially given you were so much in love with the brand?
I think this is a pretty common thread in my career is I think I had been in roles where I feel like I had given a lot of myself and I've gotten a lot, but it felt like I was kind of ready. At Spotify, I'd been there for 10 years and I had done like 3 different roles. I thought to myself, I can continue to grow with the company. At this point, everybody knew who Spotify was. It was a notable brand. And it was something that, I had a lot of pride for having those 10 years, but it was also something that I started to ask myself, like, can I do something outside of Spotify? Like, can I have that same success? I wanted to pressure test myself a little bit. I had gotten, like, to your point about complacency. It wasn't that I was complacent by any means, that I was like mailing it in or a rest invest kind of person, but, the complacency of like, am I challenging myself in the same way? And after 10 years, so many of like pivotal moments in my life were wrapped into there. But I started to say, like, is this it? I could have stayed there for a number of years. And I kind of found myself at this crossroads of, if I stay, then I might as well stay and I might as well give it all, and continue to give it all. And maybe I'm a lifer. But then I thought to myself, like, but why? Why not try something else? Why not try another company, another brand, another mission, and, see if I can have the same success, on a personal scale, to feel that it wasn't a fluke, just me at Spotify was good, me at another company could be good. And so, yeah, so it was a little bit of just, I think, wanting to continually step outside my comfort zone and just really see what I could do.
So I have to ask at this point, given Winnie is a community and app for women in tech, making wealth building actionable. Given that you were the 30th-ish employee, did Spotify bring you sort of life-changing wealth?
It did. It brought me life affirming wealth in the sense that, when I started, like I said, it's $45,000 or $50,000 in New York, which at the time was nothing, but I wasn't doing it for the money, right? But as the company grew, obviously my salary grew. And I even remember at the time, like my shares, I'd been there for 4 years. They had vested. I had a period of time to buy them. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, it's so much money to buy these, and being like, should I do it? And I did it, but it wasn't like a nominal amount for me to buy those. And so it was a risk. It was a gamble, right? But I, again, believed in the company and believed in what we had built. And so I did it, but it was kind of after that moment where I think that gave me the foundation of taking money and being able to put it back in the stock market, right? And being able to like build wealth, which is something that I never was able to do before because I had a really unhealthy relationship with money. I was the kind of person where as long as it sat in my savings, I felt like I have it and I can spend it. And that's great, but I didn't want to look at it all the time. I didn't want to think about putting it any places. It was like the virtual version of putting it under the mattress, I guess. And, as I kind of matured in age, like I started becoming more comfortable with talking about it and more comfortable, I think, with feeling like you can use wealth to invest in other areas and grow that. It was the cusp of me, I think, getting money to where it was not just money that I was getting from my salary, but money that actually could be brought in from other areas. And I think that was why it was probably so pivotal. Not that I was making a crazy amount of my salary, and definitely not that I was like, getting a crazy buyout when the company went public, but more that it just gave me a little bit more of the money that enabled me to put back and start to actually build more of a wealth.
So IPO, it was definitely one of the tickers for your increase in wealth, but you also noted marrying your husband and becoming a dual income as an increase in your wealth as well. How did that go? Did you guys combine your accounts or do you keep them separate? Like, how do you talk with your husband about finances?
Great question. We had that conversation when we got married about like, what do we want to do with our finances? And he had helped me pay off some student loan debt. We had, I think, went into our relationship very honest with each other about not only like what money we had, what money we didn't have, in kind of our relationship with money. And so it felt quite natural for us to combine our amounts, like we paid for our wedding. So everything that we did in our relationship was 50-50 from the get-go. We combined our wealth. And then I think it was interesting because the relationship we had to money was quite different. So my husband, I think took the fact that he didn't have money growing up to learn more about how do you use money? Where I actually had the kind of polar opposite reaction to it growing up. There was just a not healthy relationship where I think if I just put it in my account, then it was like, it's there, but I don't need to like acknowledge it. And I just don't need to think about it. That obviously isn't healthy either. And so he, in a lot of ways, we started basically doing an Excel spreadsheet where we basically put every dollar that we spend. And I think it was through that I actually started to learn that it was more about visibility and like transparency of money that actually helps you in some ways get over that feeling that I had, which was being scared of money. And I think that nervousness, or I think being scared of it, was more around just not understanding it. And I think not knowing how to use it, my family had a lot of credit card debt growing up. So again, like for credit cards, I never wanted to use them. It was always emergencies only, and not emergencies like I need that new handbag. It was like emergencies only, having a little bit more of the transparency and then having a little bit of those conversations with him is what started to lay the groundwork for me feeling more comfortable about talking with money. And I think more comfortable in my own skin to feel like, when is there the need to take a risk, or, when is it okay to buy the handbag I want? I think a lot of it has started with just more conversations and more transparency. That's helped me get over that a little bit.
Such a positive influence. I love not only the fact that you guys were super transparent about it, also the fact that you guys are continuing that conversation and transparency and having what sounds like money dates. Or at least money discussions.
Yeah. No, money dates is pretty fair. I mean, we've had conversations like, where we've just sat down and it's been, okay, we spent this much and we see our trajectory has been like an average of this month. And I think knowledge is power. It's, it's cliche to say, but I think knowing how much we spend on average, knowing like the average we save, like all of those things just, I think, have helped me to understand a little bit more where the money goes and how to use the money.
Are you guys still using the same spreadsheet?
We are, which is not probably the best thing, but it's, at least for right now, it's been the best way because we've been able to keep it like historic data. But at some point, I'm sure we're going to throw that into something that's a little bit not so manual.
If it works, why not?
Yeah, it's works now.
The third part that I also find really interesting, what you said, was it gave you the confidence to know when you can spend the money, like on that bag or whatnot. It's sometimes when you are changing your relationship with money and you are doing the investments, etc., sometimes you can get pulled to the extreme where you feel either guilty or unsure about spending. And I love the fact that you've sort of found that balance through these discussions.
In some ways too, it also made me realize like where I desire to spend, when it comes to experiences, be it traveling, be it going to like immersive museums or things like that. I've just started to realize that I'm actually fine spending on that. I find that to be something that's really exciting to me. Understanding money also is such a powerful thing to be able to, again, understand yourself in a sense. And I think that has helped me as I've become more comfortable with money, is just understanding too where I'm comfortable spending it.
I love that. I absolutely love that. The fact that you're aligning your money values and that impacting and directing how you spend money. That's amazing. Do you feel that your evolution of relationship to money is changing how you talk or not talk about it with your daughter?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think, we've understood the importance of education and around money. And so, the moment my daughter started to show interest in wanting to get money, we give her money every week, but it's, we've built a model in giving her money that almost echoes like a salary. So we give her money on a Sunday as if you would like get a paycheck. So she does her chores during the week. She gets money on a Sunday. It's like her paycheck, and when it comes to spending money, we've told her, yeah, you can spend your money on this new scooter, but, then you can't buy that toy next week. Or if you want to save it, you get an extra, dollar in like interest, that we could give you. And so I think we're trying to do these like light touch ways to make her relationship with money be less in a scarcity and, the same relationship we had it, more of one that's empowerment around understanding money and, kind of understanding how to use it. It's definitely changed how we've spoken about it. It's definitely changed with, I think, feeling comfortable in having those conversations with her, to the best that you can with a, 6-year-old as she's starting to learn the concept of money. But it has really shifted. And I think, a lot of our desire, and especially mine as a parent, is to give her that runway where she feels, that she can understand money and how to use money and how to save money or whatever she ends up wanting to do, but that she just has that baseline education and understanding. And it isn't something to be scared of, or it isn't something that she should, feel like is in the virtual mattress,
I feel this is, in a sense, a way of generational wealth building, that you're uplifting the baseline of where she starts. I'm going to go off on a tangent on 2 keywords that you mentioned: paychecks and feeling empowered or feeling disempowered. So many things about Spotify was amazing. One of the things that you mentioned that was a bit of an irk was because you were such an early employee, that some of the later employees were coming in at a higher either salary point or RSU. What was that experience like?
Admittedly frustrating. I think it's probably natural for a lot of companies. It kind of became apparent that if I had maybe quit the company and come back, my salary probably would have been more than whether I had kind of continually got the annual increases. So it was a little bit frustrating, but again, at the end of the day, like, I also moved a number of times within the company. Had I stayed put, maybe it would have been easier to advocate for more in that position. And so in some ways it was the choices I made as well. But I think that also played a part in wanting to start exploring other opportunities. I know in a lot of cases, leaving to another company helps you to increase your salary. And so it was also something that was top of mind for me at a key juncture in my career of saying, now is the high earning potential, wanting to see where that opportunity and ceiling was or threshold was.
And at this point, you take another adventure into the unknown, into a completely different industry, from a, music loving startup to the financial institution. Was there a culture shock when you joined?
Oh yeah. I had gotten recruited essentially into Square, and it was at a time at Spotify when, like I said, I had been looking, kind of peeking my head out the door a little bit, looking at other opportunities, but I actually hadn't applied to many. An old colleague of mine from Spotify had reached out and said, hey, Square has decentralized a lot of their creative teams and is effectively looking for somebody to come in and build an entire team from scratch. And would you be interested? And it felt like the right thing at that time. Yes, it was a huge culture shock. And I think that also is probably for a number of reasons. One is I joined effectively still during the pandemic. And so I closed my computer at Spotify, and, it was a company that I had, again, been largely in person, a company that I had invested so much tenure. So I'd had such long-standing relationships and, trust with people within the company. But I closed one computer and then I opened up Square's computer, and, here was this vast world where nobody knew me, nobody really knew the work I was capable of. So there was just, I think, the culture shock for me of coming from a company for so long into a new one. And then I think it was the culture shock of coming from, like a more of a music and audio company into fintech. And fintech is very different, which was a little bit of a learning curve for me going into it.
I'd love to close out with one topic that has especially been lingering in my mind from our pre-call. A lot of things happened after you joined Square. And one thing we wanted to take a look at was your career satisfaction slightly dips at this point, partly because of what you mentioned, the COVID experience, onboarding during that time, etc. But you also mentioned this was when you turned the age into awesome 40s and started thinking about, what do I want in life? Was there a trigger, or was it just the age, or what was sort of going through your head?
Well, it's interesting. Jack Dorsey actually says, when people have asked him about, just how he prioritizes his time and the company, he's often said, everybody's going to die, and the way that I spend my time is, I look and I ask myself each day, like, how do I want to spend that time? Like, how do I want to spend today? How do I want to spend the next hour?
Are you afraid of death? No, I'm not afraid of it. I just use it as a reminder, like, I have an hour. Is this really what I'm going to spend the hour doing?
it's actually something that's, I think, has resonated with me in this moment of my life because, I look at myself and it's, I'm embarking, whether I want to admit it to myself or not, your 40s is embarking a little bit on a new chapter, so I have this new chapter ahead of me to say, like, what do I want to be? I spent your 20s hustling, like getting those pivotal moments and opportunities, laying that groundwork. I spent my 30s refining that groundwork, like developing a smarter and deeper sense of self. And now here I'm in my 40s with more of just kind of thinking about this next chapter of my life. I've started to say to myself, like, well, what is my next chapter? Is it more important that I continue to build wealth? And if I continue to build wealth, is it about getting that VP title? For me as an individual, is it less about, climbing the corporate ladder to the highest I can kind of reach? And is it more about just self-satisfaction and indexing heavier on maybe like work-life balance and wanting to have a job that I find satisfaction in, but that it's more about, actually being able to spend time on hobbies, which I admittedly like don't really have any, because I usually spend more time at work, and so I think I'm definitely at a moment now of starting to question a lot of those things. And I think they were brought on by turning 40, but I don't think it necessarily is like all because of being 40. I think it's, and it's something that's been probably brewing as I've gone to these new stages within my life. And I think, 40, it's, I have the runway ahead of me. And now it's asking myself, like, if I know I'm going to die, like, how do I want to spend my time? And, I think that's a question that I am asking myself a lot these days is, like, where is that fulfillment now in my life? And, like, where do I want to spend that time and spend my time while I'm still here?
As someone who is in a similar age group, I think I resonated so much with what you said because I'm going through the exact same questions in my career journey and where my life currently is at as well. There is something about morbid thoughts that grounds you. Are you leaning towards one way or the other? Like, do you feel you're coming towards an answer? If yes, please share.
I don't know that I'm any closer to coming to like a very definitive answer, but I think I've been honing in a lot on like what matters to me, and as much as I want to believe that I'm like a 9 to 5 kind of set it, forget it with work. And, like, I think as a person, like my husband always likes to joke that I'm Disney World in a Six Flags universe, but I'm very much somebody that, I will always give 110%, like whether that's in my friendships, I try to give 110, whether that's like how I show up at work, like knowing that I want to give 110 and that will probably always be my ethos. I want to do it with a company, a brand, a mission, and people that I think appreciate that. And I think that's a little bit the only thing that I've kind of scratched the surface of, like I think it's really important, the relationships that you build with people. And I think I just want to work for a brand that I feel, I feel like what they're doing is something that I'm like, I stand behind and I'm like, yes, I believe in this. Like, I want to drink that Kool-Aid, and I want to feel like I'm putting my time away from my family towards something that has meaning to me. What that really translates then is as far as the next journey. In the age of 40, I could not tell you. I think I'm still trying to wrap my head and getting a sense for what that is.
I love this conversation. Like I said, am in a very similar phase of life. And part of it, I feel, is because I've had the experiences that I've had, I feel it's time to better filter out the noise and concentrate like you were doing with your money, like aligning my career to my values better. But I have to say, like, part of me also feels, and I don't know if I'm prematurely saying this, but I should be maybe a bit more risk averse. I've heard from quite a few colleagues who are a few years ahead of us how real ageism is. So I'm not sure if this is also the time where I need to be doubling down and really etching out a brand name for myself. I'm totally with you. I have more questions than answers at this point.
No, but I think you're right. I mean, that's also, I guess, like a fear that I have is like ageism in the workplace, and a fear of, that kind of, have you done enough to validate where you are, to like cancel out the naysayers and to support you in your next journey? Or is it really about standing on your own and saying, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter what people around you think, is like the personal satisfaction. So yeah, it's, I don't know, 40s for me, at least it's only been since January, but it definitely has opened up that door of a lot of like soul searching. Cause I think feels like a pivotal time to do that. And it's a challenging thing, but there is something that keeps resonating in my head around like what Jack has said in, a number of different, I think, public forums and definitely in company forums around that, like, how do you want to spend your time, and what do you want to look back on and what do you want to feel proud about? And I think I'm a dreamer, and I think I'm a dreamer for big things. And I think in some cases that's what probably propels me to take the risks.
Well, Christina, you have a history of aiming high, achieving it, and going beyond the boxes. Excited to see what the new adventures come out to be. Thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.